Hi there, and welcome to Enterprise AI Innovators, a show where top technology executives share how AI is transforming the enterprise. In each episode, guests uncover the real-world applications of AI, from improving products and optimizing operations to redefining the customer experience. I'm Evan Reiser, the founder and CEO of Abnormal AI.
And I'm Saam Motamedi, a general partner at Greylock Partners.
Today on the show, we're bringing you a conversation with Ron White, former Global Chief Information Officer at Avanade. Avanade is a $4.5 billion professional services firm with over 60,000 employees focused on helping enterprises modernize their technology systems. There are three interesting things that stood out to me in my conversation with Ron. First is that Ron believes in the age of generative AI, any repetitive or frustrating task, like writing performance reviews or cleaning up your inbox, can be handed off to AI. His advice is simple: start with pain points and then automate from there. Second, he's pushing IT leaders to rethink old models with an agile by necessity mindset. For agent-based systems, speed matters more than perfection. Teams learn faster by deploying early, testing quickly, and iterating often. And finally, Ron described a future of work where AI doesn't just give answers, but assigns tasks. It's a continuous loop of experimentation between humans and machines where collaboration drives progress. Ron, maybe kick it off. Do you mind sharing a little bit with our audience about kind of your background and what your role is today?
Yeah, so I grew up in the consulting industry, started with what was then Andersen Consulting a long time ago, and became Accenture. And then I went off to do the corporate thing and was a corporate CIO for a few years, and then came back to Avanade as the Microsoft giant started to reappear. What we do is we do all the Microsoft services for Accenture. We're at about a $4.5 billion entity with about 60,000 employees. And I'm our global CIO. And one of the things that's very unique about being the CIO of Avanade is we're expected to be the tip of the spear for everything that Microsoft does. And so anything they want to experiment with, anything that is new, I get the opportunity to put in production as fast as I possibly can. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. Which is a challenge in and of itself. And then, the hardest part for me is to really understand the broader market. And, we like to think that we're way ahead because especially in this space, in agentic and generative AI, Microsoft's pretty well positioned. But it's always a challenge to really make sure that we're in the best spot. And that's where our parents, so we're a joint venture owned by Microsoft and Accenture, help us stay honest. So Microsoft helps us stay honest to make sure that we're way ahead for them. And Accenture helps us stay honest in terms of, are you really differentiated in terms of what we're seeing across the broader technology landscape?
You have a very unique role where you're simultaneously thinking about how to deploy technology inside your own organization, but also how do you help your organization deploy, new technology in kind of customers' organizations. How does that kind of unique perspective working with so many kind of third parties, like how does that influence your kind of your thinking about how to deploy the best technology or get the best productivity right inside the organization?
Well, our job in a lot of ways is to be the best reference for our clients. So we go out there every day as a company and we're working with our clients to implement solutions in the Microsoft ecosystem, which is very broad. And so when they say, okay, have you done this before? What does good look like? The first place I want our sales folks to send them is to me and say, I'll show you what good looks like. We've been doing this for a long time. And it's just, the only problem we have at times is that our clients say, well, you're so far ahead of us. You've been doing this for so long. You don't even remember what it was like when you didn't have this kind of stuff, especially when you talk about state and local government. So clients. So that's the fun part, right? Is knowing that, and the scary part to an extent, knowing that our entire sales force looks for us to be that reference one, as we call it, the best reference of how to do this and what good looks like.
You've been through many technology waves. Like, where are we sort of in this wave, and like where are we in the AI hype cycle?
I don't think we're as far as everybody thinks we are. I think in this day and age, if you're in technology and you get asked questions, where are you on the agentic spectrum? Are you using generative AI technologies? If you don't say yes, you essentially get fired. And so in that environment, you have to say yes, right? Yes, we're using it. What we're seeing, and I run a lot of CIO forums and talking to peers, especially in the middle market. We are not necessarily, Accenture handles a lot of the Fortune 500, so the massive enterprises. We handle a lot of the middle market. And so I'm talking to middle market CIOs a lot. And, they are, a year ago, the big thing was their CEO coming to them and said, what's our AI strategy? And they would say, "Oh, I'm gonna have it," and then they would go away and they would say, "I don't know what to do," right? And so we've evolved from that to say, "Hey, okay, so we have a general strategy around AI," but what one of the CIOs that was in one of the sessions said, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, he said, "When are we going to get past these little parlor tricks and actually do something that impacts the enterprise in a substantial way?" And I think that's where we're not as far as people think.
What are like the 2 or 3 most common wins people have seen so far, like over the last 12 months?
I think the early wins are that I've heard from clients is when they enable and what I talked about earlier, give purview over a large language model to their enterprise data. And to be able to kind of replace their legacy knowledge management capability with the ability to simply use a large language model over that enterprise data set, that is a huge win. So whether you do that with Copilot or a commensurate capability in the Google or Amazon world, it doesn't really matter. You're changing the game right away. And I think that it is the bar is moving so fast in terms of what you have to do. And so if you don't stay on top of it and iterate it and iterate it and iterate it, you lose. I think the second thing is very siloed parlor tricks, if you will, of using this technology in individual functions in very pointed ways, right? And I say siloed because they're not invasive, they're not broad, but they're impactful. And so everybody's going to have a small example of, hey, we did this thing and it substantially moved the needle. For us, it was about answering RFPs and analyzing whether or not an RFP was something that we were likely to win or lose and make those qualifying discussions and decisions right away. That was a huge win for us, really small, very siloed, but very powerful.
How do companies get their employees to actually engage? And are there some like hero use cases that you see the most forward-leaning employees do on top of something like Copilot?
The first step is to understand what the heck you're talking about from a user interface perspective. And again, this is the most exciting stuff, but really quickly, at the beginning of the discussion over a year ago, we would talk about how important it is to begin to leverage these technologies so you have that opportunity to iterate, you don't get behind. And I'd use these examples of saying, okay, especially in the legal space, really powerful examples of analyzing red lines and all this kind of stuff. And I would get these really weird looks because people had turned it on and they would say, I just don't understand when you talk about doing some customization of these capabilities and giving it access to certain data and allowing it to do certain things. And so, when we talk to clients about that, the first thing is really an education is saying, you say you're using certain things, do you really understand what the impact and the implication can be?
I was talking to a CIO the other week, and they're at this kind of, not a high-tech company, right? It's kind of an older company that's been around for 200 years. And the CIO was kind of lamenting to me, like, I'm really struggling to get the senior leadership on board with the AI stuff. What would be your kind of like top 3, quick wins to help kind of get started?
I think the first one, and I'll give some specifics, but the first one is really drawing that analogous point, I think, to applications today, mobile apps. So the first thing I generally do when I hear our leadership is not quite on board yet, they're like, okay, then tell them they're no longer allowed to use any mobile apps. Just say you can't do that anymore. right? That's essentially what you're doing, because we're going through the same cycle. End users now are creating their own agents. And so our biggest problem is not people using it because they're using it, right? It's as we talked about, governing it and controlling it. So you remember early on, and even today, with the stores and all things, I mean, think of the sophistication in the Apple Store, the Google Store, all these things, right? And you understanding, is that a good app? Should I use that app? What is the personality of that app? How does it function? What data does it have access to? This is where we are. So if you don't start now, that kind of stuff that you would all agree you have to have. Do you really want your users using agents that aren't secure, don't know what data they have access to, don't know what personalities they have? No, of course not, right? So, that's the first thing is, if you say we're not quite sure, you're basically saying you shouldn't be using applications on your mobile phone, which of course you would never say. And then I would go into what are some of the low-hanging fruit, as you say. And I mentioned earlier, like the legal side. Because the litigious world is so defined, the large language models are really good at this kind of stuff. It's not about eliminating my lawyers. I need as many lawyers as I had before. But a lawyer using generative AI technology will 100% of the time beat a lawyer who's not. Period, end of statement. And so if you just take that conclusion and say, and it's so feasible to use it, that means that your competitor, if you're not, is using it. And so you're going to lose. So you kind of focus on their competitive side, and or you draw this analogous thing of using something that everybody uses every day and draw that analogy. I think those two things have worked really well.
How has AI changed like how you work personally? Like are there kind of things that have changed in your day-to-day workflow, right? And like, what are maybe like 2 or 3 pro tips for me and Saam, right? In terms of like how we should be using AI?
Anything you hate doing, use it. Especially annual review time. Oh my gosh, who likes writing those annual reviews that you have to do? Who likes organizing their email box? Who likes figuring out when you come back from holiday, what the action items are? I really like anything you hate to do, use it. And it will streamline that task and make it easier for you to do so you can focus on things you love to do. That's kind of, to me, the first step, right? And it's all so feasible to do. And then I think the other thing that's really important to understand is, and this is where it gets a little scary, but at the same time it's powerful, is think of it as a person. So if it doesn't do the right thing for you, tell it and ask it. I expected you to come back with this result, and it didn't. That's how you'd speak to a human. If I say something that's confusing to you, you would say, Ron, that's confusing to me. Can you explain it? And so all the time we get these beginners, if you will, coming back and saying, well, it didn't work. I'm like, well, what do you mean it didn't work? Like, well, it gave me the wrong answer. Like, oh, so, a human's never given you a wrong answer before. So, and that means you just don't talk to anybody who's ever given you a wrong answer, right? And so, kind of making people think like that too is really, really important. But I think, we talked earlier about, is it truly embedded in is it really enhancing the business outcomes that we're achieving? So personal productivity, efficiency, that's what is being done today. So if you're not gaining an effective productivity quotient, if you will, then you're already behind. But what you really need to start thinking about is those situations where is every single accountant in your accounting department using it in a consistent way to drive the results that they get every day. That's the question you need to ask. And so you expand it to every single employee. Every single employee should be using these tools every day to enhance their personal productivity and the outcomes they generate. And if you can't say that and know that, or don't have a plan to get there, then I would suggest you're already behind.
For maybe some CIOs that are listening that are maybe feel a little bit behind based on some of your past comments. Like, what's like one use case where it's like, hey, I recommend every CIO, they should be doing at least this with AI kind of every single week. What would that be?
I mean, enterprise search, finding things. You should never use traditional word enterprise search again. You should be using a large language model capability to help you find everything that you need and analyze it. So if you're an executive and your team sends you things to review, if you're not using a generative AI capability to review those documents and generate insights, then you should be.
How do you think these AI capabilities change the average knowledge worker's work like 5 years from now? How does kind of like the average employee's life change? Like what is kind of maybe uncommon today becomes very common in the average kind of IT organization? What are some of your predictions for where some of these technologies take us?
The thing I've heard recently, which is to me fascinating, is the fact that if you think about how like an R&D, a research analyst works, they don't really know where they're going. What they do know is where they want to get to. And so the scientific method, if you will. You start to see a world where you're feeding an outcome you're trying to generate from these large language models, and they come back to you and say, well, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but if you could run these 5 experiments for me and come back with the answers, I will then take the next step. And so it's this combination of human and large language model interaction. So the large language model can't run the experiment. It's a physical experiment out in the ocean or something like that, or analyzing these specimens. And they don't really know what the answer is, and they can't really make conclusions until you feed it back these experiments. And then you feed it back the results of those experiments, and it comes back and says, okay, I need you to refine these 2, and then I'll come back with some conclusive results. And so then you go back in the field. So you can kind of think of this back and forth of, it's not giving you answers, it's giving you tasks. And then you're coming back and giving the results of those tasks, and it's extending the concept.
What's your like contrarian take, right? What's a thing you think that'll be true in the future of AI that maybe most CIOs would disagree with? Or maybe most CIOs would think are kind of science fiction?
I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, it is replacing jobs. It is replacing humans. And anybody that makes that argument that it's not, I'm not so sure really has sound footing to stand on. So then what does that mean? My team asks me that all the time, which is, from a career progression perspective in the IT space, what can I do in the age of AI to make myself relevant? And, I need, right now, at least, you run through things that we still need, which is experienced people to, run sophisticated programs, understand how to interact with executives, gather insightful perspectives, create. So, anything that is a commodity activity, you need to look at as something that you do not want to build a strength in. I don't think the Terminator future is real. I tend to agree with with a lot of really, really smart people saying this is not going to take over the world. But that does not mean, and none of them are saying, that we don't have a massive change in what it's going to take to be productive as a human. And that's the part I think we need to focus on. We've all heard those analogies of the big, massive phone rooms of yesteryear, and yet those people have jobs now, and we're not full of those phone rooms. And so this is the same thing that's going to happen. These jobs will be replaced, and we'll create new ones. I think that gets a little, I don't know what those new jobs are going to be. So that's what I want to focus on. That's what I want to tell people to think about is, what can you do to be productive in this new world? That's what I'm telling my kids. Like, programming, getting good at programming. I mean, come on. No, that's not what you want to be doing.
We've probably talked to like more people anywhere else on the planet about their AI roadmaps, right? And kind of like what their plans are. And I'm sure you've seen some of those roadmap items, come true or fall apart. Are there any things that kind of like are the red flags where you see a project and you're like, look, I know that sounds sexy, but like that's not the right place to start. That's going to kind of take you in the wrong direction, right? Any kind of traps, right? Or any kind of non-obvious traps you'd call out and maybe kind of warn some of your peers about?
We tried Agile in the corporate world, and what we had was a bunch of failures because you can't create a transaction system that generates an invoice in an agile way. It doesn't work that way. Okay, and so it was one of those things where we're saying we're being agile, but we're really not. We're really using waterfall methodologies that we've been using for years. We're just increasing how often we go to the end user community to ask questions like, is this working the way we expected it? So it's iterative techniques as opposed to agile techniques. I say that because agentic is perfect for agile because it never works right out of the box. It always is going to be inconsistent in its results. So I go way back to what Saam said from the very beginning. You have to get stuff out there fast. And you have to express to your end user community two things. One, it won't work, but it's valuable. And two, here's the feedback mechanism and the commitment that we will be agile and improve its functionality very, very quickly. So if you put something out there that doesn't work and then don't fix it, that's a huge problem. And yet that's not what our corporate IT departments are used to doing. They're used to putting things out there that work, that need to be enhanced. That is not what's happening right now. So what I find is my teams, I'm like, why isn't this out there? We had this commitment, this timeline, we're behind. Well, it's not quite working right. And what you realize, it'll never work right. So you got to have that discussion, It'll never work right. So when is the right time to get it out there, get the feedback? And then they put it out there and they're not ready for the feedback and they can't iterate it. So all those things are really important.
So at the end of our episode, we like to do a bit of a lightning round, right? And we ask like questions that are very difficult to answer in one tweet, but we're kind of looking for like the one tweet response. So please just forgive me and Saam in the future if these are kind of a little bit unfair. But Saam, do you want to kick it off for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ron, maybe to start, how do you think companies should measure the success of a CIO in this AI sort of era?
The number of employees that use agentic technology and how many times each day they do it.
So, Ron, you have a bit of an unfair advantage because you see so many companies and you're just kind of dealing with, you get kind of firsthand look at a lot of new technologies. Maybe for the average CIO, what do you recommend is the best way to stay up to date on the latest kind of enterprise AI trends?
I think you got to use your partners, right? Your technology. I mean, they have go out to Redmond, go out to San Francisco, visit Google, go out there and make them show you their roadmap, what they're doing, what bleeding edge looks like. And ask really, really difficult questions like, well, that's interesting, but how do they do it? What's the impact going to be? I think rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty is the best way to do it.
Maybe to switch gears to the more personal side, what's a book that you've read recently that had a big impact on you and why?
Well, it's funny. I'm a big history fan, and so I don't read a lot of technology oriented kind of stuff. But I think in history you can learn a lot, right? And so, I'm reading a book about James Garfield, the former president, right? And he was this huge innovator, right? When it came to farming techniques and some of the things that at the time were extremely important. And he was friends with all these inventors, the Edisons of the world, and all that kind of stuff. Innovation doesn't go away, and always asking yourself, what can we do that's gonna change the game? Be an innovator. You get lazy, I think, in this day and age to a certain extent, thinking that these technologies are going to solve all your problems. And some of the basic things that you have to do as a leader and forcing yourself to innovate and forcing your teams to innovate are still so important out there. And just because they say they're using, as we've talked about over and over again, and AI and generative AI technologies doesn't mean they're innovating.
What's the upcoming technology you're personally just really excited about?
So to me, what quantum computing can really do for society, what it can really do for our industries, that becomes really interesting when you change the game. If you're doing it right in this day and age, some of the things that from a data perspective, going back to a little bit boring stuff, right? But some of the things from a data perspective that took 6 to 9 months a few years back can literally be done in 10 minutes now. Literally, right? When you see that level of a change, quantum, should be able to deliver that level of change. And what does it mean to the industry? I think it's fascinating to explore what the quantum world looks like.
If you think really far ahead, right, 10, 20 years ahead, what do you think is going to be true about AI's impact on the world that even those in the AI ecosystem would consider science fiction today?
I think it's not going to look as different as you think on the surface. I think a lot of people are going to be doing very similar things. They're just going to be doing it with the help of technology instead of humans. I think you're still going to have farmers, right? But the yields will be to the point where we never could imagine them. We're still going to have environmental issues, and we're going to have environmental scientists working on solving those issues. But their ability to make an impact is going to be an order of magnitude different. And so I think as much as we think about this massive change that we're going through, I think a lot of the jobs themselves will be the same. And that's not, super exciting, but I think, and maybe I'm just saying that to keep myself sane, but I just can't imagine a restructuring of our society. If you really want to go into it, then, maybe the world dynamic politically, socially, everything changes. I mean, I don't know. But I would like to believe that, the good guys will win. And a lot of this is going to be helping us be better humans.
Well, I appreciate you sharing, Ron. Thanks so much for making time. This has been a really fun episode. And I know I'm personally looking forward to talking more with you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Ron.
Yeah, my pleasure. Really fun talking to you guys.
That was Ron White, former Global Chief Information Officer at Avanade.
Thanks for listening to Enterprise AI Innovators. I'm Saam Motamedi, a general partner at Greylock Partners.
And I'm Evan Reiser, the founder and CEO of Abnormal AI. Please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Learn more about enterprise AI transformation at enterprisesoftware.blog.
This show is produced by Josh Meir. See you next time.